to be the discourse of the relationship dynamic between African American males and females, quote unquote, black men and black women. I really like using the term black and white people, and I'm going to actively go out of my way to start reducing reducing its use in my vocabulary. So there'll be a little bit of a disconnect, but once I continue to make an active effort, eventually it'll become natural. Um, Nessa is supposed to be my co-host, but it's not. She's not interested in being my co-host. So my 2 cent desperately needs a female presence, but I'm not able to get a female presence. I am not wearing my Galaxy ring, but I am legally married. She was Nessa was my girlfriend. I guess she still is my girlfriend. I don't know, but I was dating her before I married my wife, and then after me and her separated, I got married to my wife. After me and my wife separated, I got married. I didn't get married, but I started dating Nessa. I'm currently still married to my wife because I don't have the finances to legally divorce her. That's not really what this video is about. This video is basically about the relationship dynamic between African American men and African American women, and this energy of um, the energy within society about how men are automatically wrong and we're automatically the failures, and how women are automatically right and women are automatically the successful energy, the success in a relationship, and that these nuanced posts that are engaging in clickbait dynamics for likes, and they have all these controversial topics and stuff. When you are younger than 16 and basically a child, when you're younger than 18 and basically a child, between 16 and 18 is the most complicated human experience, and from 18 to 25 is when we are people, humans, we are people, cognitive human beings around the age of 16 consistently, right? Self-awareness can manifest in a person before the age of 16, but generally around the age of 16 you should either already have self-awareness, or hey, welcome to the stream, or you're behind the curve in self-awareness. And I honestly believe that some people will never obtain self-awareness. Some people are just large language models walking around with emotions. Hi, welcome to the stream. So between the ages of 16 and 18 is when you start developing self-awareness and start coming into self. And I need to activate my 2 cent on YouTube so that I can see. It's not what I wanted you to do. Hold on. People are coming to the stream and I can't read the comments from here. I'm fine, thank you. So from 16 to 18, you should either have self-awareness or be self-aware. And some people never reach self-awareness. From 18 to 25 is the time when human growth as an adult human male and an adult human female becomes exponential. Our ability to understand and process information becomes exponential. The thing that they never teach people under the age of under the age of 18 is that there's no easy way to say this, so I'm going to just say it bluntly. From birth to the age of 18, we are functionally, I don't want to say retarded, we are functionally mentally regressed. Our mental capacity below the age of 18 is not developed well enough. Our hardware isn't fully formed, which is our brain, to be able to fully express the human condition, right? That doesn't mean that children are not capable, competent human beings. It means that the state of being a child on average is inherently, by the limitations of the growing mind, less than that of the average adult. Some children actually can exceed and go beyond the average adult. But in general, the child mind, the adolescent mind, the under the age of 18 mind is inherently physically limited by the development of the actual human brain. So you're not competent at the adult level until you turn 18 because there are physical limitations of the brain that is still developing. The brain starts to develop at an exponential rate from 18 to 25. And all of the things that you learn as a child become concrete and become permanent in your mind after you turn 16. From 16 to 18 is when your mind starts to actually develop, grow, and evolve. Below the age of 16, we live in a state of non in a state of sexual neutrality. We don't have strong influences of our sexual drives and our sexual tendencies. And then around the age of 16 on average is when young people start to develop their sexual persona, which ultimately will influence the rest of your life. You'll never be the same person that you was before you mature sexually. And I want to take a second to address the idea, because I got a lot of flack on Facebook for the idea of maturity. Maturity is the capacity by which a person is able to make solid judgment and decisions based on what they're trying to achieve in life. Mature people are able to effectively make good, sound, solid decisions. Immature people are not. One of the biggest influencers of our ability to make decisions is our desire to have sex and produce offspring, right? So maturity and sexual maturity are not the same thing. On average, females sexually mature are able to get pregnant and have birth at an earlier age than the average boy or male, right? I don't know why this subject went spiraling into rape and pedophilia and justification of men taking advantage of women and all other stuff. I don't understand. Like, this is the reason why I created my 2 cents. It doesn't make any sense why we can't just have basic conversations. I understand that it is difficult for a parent to have this kind of conversation with their children individually, but I don't understand why 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, and 50-year olds are not able to have a discourse as a normalized functional person. I don't understand why there's always a disconnect in having basic human conversations and basic human interactions. And if we can't get this shit right as adults, how do we expect young people to understand and become functional adults when they turn 18, right? I'm not saying that young girls should be taken advantage of or violated. I'm stating plainly that the capacity by which a young female sexually matures and is able to become impregnated before a young man or a boy her age is able to sexually mature enough to produce sperm to impregnate her is what is implied by the idea that girls and women mature faster than boys and men. Boys are inherently more immature than girls, but I would argue that boys and men are more functional as adults on average than young girls and women. The capacity by which a man is able to formulate a plan and execute on that plan to achieve a very specific desire and goal is inherently greater than that of a girl and a woman. Women tend to engage in irrational behavior and impulsive instinctual responses to the influences of the world more than men, right? Women are more readily quick to jump off of a cliff without concerning herself with her safety of how she's going to survive falling off the cliff than a man. Men will typically try to reconcile and weigh the options of what should happen. Women typically do not. So that is why we typically say in general that females mature faster than boys, because we can't say the sexual part when you are a young child, right? All of this is being said to form the structure of the conversation that I would like to have. And I mentioned Nessa and my wife earlier because um, Nessa and I are basically separated and barely on talking terms. But we were never really in a relationship anyway. We were never really. My goal, what I said to Nessa was, I want to be able to be a functional adult and have competent, sound conversations with you. We should be able to just communicate effectively and not have to play the BS games that come with being part of a organized religion, right? That wasn't possible for her. She wanted to come in and put up rules and make demands and tell me what I was going to do and treat me like I was a kid. If you don't want, if females don't want males to behave a certain way, they shouldn't communicate to that person like they're that thing. Like if you want a man to be mature, you should speak to that man with maturity. If you want a man to behave in a certain with a certain mannerism, you as a woman should carry yourself with that same mannerism. The dynamic between the African American male and the African American female is one that is infringed upon by the legacy of slavery in America. Women, African American women wants to treat African American men like we're boys because treating the African American man like he is a boy was how Caucasian men, the slave masters, controlled and dominated the African man. Because a 30-year-old African American man and a 30-year-old African American and a 30-year-old Caucasian American man are equal. But if you can convince the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old boy to continue to operate as a boy, no matter how big he is, no matter how strong he is, if you can mentally keep him locked in that adolescent mindset, then you can control and manipulate him and you can keep him in a position of authority. That is the reason why the relationship dynamic between the African American male and the African American female typically falls apart and fails, because the African American female disassociates herself with the inequality that exists in society and believes that she's able to hold the title of Caucasian male. She believes that she is equal to the Caucasian male and can navigate the world the way the way the Caucasian male navigates the world, and can move into the same spaces that the Caucasian male moves into the same way the Caucasian male does, because the Caucasian male acknowledges her as a female, right? The Caucasian female knows that her status in society is less than that of the Caucasian male, and she perceives herself as equal to the African American male. What this means is that the Caucasian male typically acknowledges the humanity of the African American male and doesn't associate the infringement of the African American male as a boy the way the Caucasian male does. Because the Caucasian female doesn't want to be a servant either. So the Caucasian female sees herself as synonymously equal to that African American male because she wants to inherit the same authority and power that the African American male has, because to be equal to the African American male is to be equal to the Caucasian male, right? But the African American female lives in a dynamic that makes her feel like she is less than the Caucasian female. And instead of aligning herself with her feminine energy and making herself equal to the Caucasian female, she tries to skip over that and make herself equal to the Caucasian male by implying that she is superior to the African American male, which is inherently what the Caucasian male wants her to do anyway, so that he can maintain his authority over the African American male. This is the dynamic that exists in society. And it starts with the African American female conditioning the African American boy, her son, to fall into line and be in compliance with the social norm of a society built on inequality. Are we following? The hierarchy is Caucasian male, Caucasian female, African American male, African American female. Right? That's the way the social hierarchy is structured. And then everyone else tries to figure out which one of these four ladders they are quote unquote inside of. There's this unnecessary dynamic where we're all trying to figure out how we fit into this social ladder and social structure so that we can get resources which are being hoarded by the elitist Caucasian and Europeans of the world, both male and female. So we're all trying to get our crumbs from this hierarchy that exists. So in this dynamic, the conflict that exists between the African American male and the African American female is compliance, right? The African American female hears what is being said and believes what is being said because her allegiance is to the idealized Caucasian deity, Jesus Christ. She associates Jesus Christ with the image of a Caucasian male. Close your eyes, picture Jesus Christ. You're not going to see Paul Emerson. You're going to see the idealized image of a Caucasian male. And Jesus Christ represents the idealized embodiment of the black person. Right? Jesus Christ embodies the idealized, oppressed, defeated, enduring, overcoming suffering of the average black person. Jesus Christ embodies the idea that through humility, the slave can get freedom and be saved and have salvation. That's what religion teaches. That's the way religion has structured it. So we associate the divinity of Jesus Christ with the idea of European, and we disassociate the authority and the superiority that Europeans have through Jesus Christ by acknowledging that Jesus Christ is supposed to be quote unquote the oppressed and the suffering and the embodiment of hope and all that other stuff, so that we can remain in compliance to inequality within our system. That's how all this stuff works. And the relationship dynamic is that the African American female, being a sexually mature person, is sexually attracted to and in love with the image of a Caucasian male as a divine entity. But the African American male cannot be a homosexual and have that same relationship with Christ. So our egos creates the image of an African American Jesus Christ, but we put our energy into outwardly into the image of the Caucasian male image of Jesus Christ. So we internalize that we are God while we give our energy and essence into the established system of being in compliance with Caucasians. Not because they're superior, not because we think that they're better than us, but because we are functional members of a society that is built on corruption. Right? Our capacity to function within an uncivilized society is civic of us. Our capacity to endure injustice is civic of us. But the people that are in a position of authority do not embody civics. They do not embody justice. They want to coerce and corrupt and control and hurt. And the biggest issue that I have specifically is that what do we gain by not having enough so that Caucasians can feel what? Why do you have to be superior? What is so important that you have to be superior to me? Why can't we just be equals? Why can't I work a job and have enough money to take care of myself? Why do I have to work a job to make enough money to not be able to take care of myself and have to deal with all the unnecessary injustices that come from that? Why is this the standard way that society is governed and ran? That's the question that I want to know. That's what I want to have answered. I don't understand that part of it. Everything else is fine. I get it. I can understand. I can rock with it. I can roll with it. It's all arbitrary and subjective. But the problem that I have as a person that lives on this planet is, why do I have to give more than I have to receive not enough? That's the question that I want to know. Why do I have to give more than I have to not get enough? Why is that the standard? The problem that I don't have a problem with being a single, unqualified male in a world where I don't have what it takes to maintain a stable and healthy relationship with women. The problem that I have is that I am none of those things, yet I am single because of a society that is designed in such a way that I don't even get an opportunity to even make an effort. Like, that part doesn't make any sense to me. Well, it actually does. And the thing, here's the thing that I know about why I'm doing these videos, because my father said the same thing to me when I was younger, and I responded the same way. I don't believe in discrimination. I don't believe in racism. None of that stuff is true. If you work hard, if you follow the rules, if you do what you're told, if you just show up, then you will get what you were expected, and you will have the things that you need. And the reason why we develop that mentality is because of the relationship we have with our parents, right? Your parents tell you to do something, you do it, you get what you want. In that exchange, we develop this idea like this is the way the world operates. But outside of your house, the world doesn't operate like that. You can go to work every day and work 40 hours a week and get a 32-hour check. And you can go to your manager and say, hey, I work 40 hours a week. My hours are short. And your manager will bullshit you into you being compliant to not getting paid the full amount of your check. But I'm going to call the labor works and I'm going to report you. You can do all of that. But when the system doesn't work, you're calling them and you're communicating to them, and they're not going to do anything. This is the way the world's going to operate. And I know that those of you that are 18 years of age will experience this, and you're going to remember what I'm saying now. And you're going to come back in 2 or 3 years and be like, you said it, I experienced it, I don't understand. But you should understand, because that's why I'm making the videos. I didn't have a Paul Emerson when I was 19, because I would have made better decisions. I would have been able to correlate what was said to readjust and reflect on what needs to happen. I watched Malcolm X and Martin Luther King speeches in the 90s, and the stuff that they were saying in those videos was still relevant to the present state of the world. It was still relevant. My military career was stifled by nothing but African American women. My greatest adversaries in the military were African American women. And my greatest allies in the military, ironically enough, were Caucasian men that didn't want to do anything about the bullshit that I was dealing with the African American women, because of the institutional racism. We're not allowed to check women for being bitches because it's quote unquote gonna violate their rights as women. But at the same time, they're allowed to show up and be fucking bitches. You want me to be a gentleman, but you don't want to be a lady. You want to speak disrespectfully to me, but you don't feel like I should have the right to communicate back to you the same way that you're communicating to me. So you can say that the social structure is in what you say that it is, but at the foundation of all of this energy is always bullying. And if you don't believe in bullying, you don't have to believe in it, but it believes in you. You don't have to believe that Caucasians are going to discriminate against you because of your skin complexion, but they will, and they're going to. And the most important part is that when there is a person that is racist in a position of power and authority doing racist things to you, it doesn't negatively affect people that are not you around you, and they're not going to sacrifice what they have to protect you from inequality. So how do we navigate that? How do we deal with that? How do we come to a mutual understanding of that? How do you, as a young person that is trying to find a sexually mature partner to produce a family with and have kids with and be a parent, how do you do that? How do you do that? Young men, 18, 19, 20, and 21, are not running around on this planet trying to have as much sex with as many women as they possibly can without believing that there's any consequence of having children. Young men don't know that they want to be fathers. Young girls, young women don't know that they want to be mothers. We're not taught those things by society. Society isn't raising 16 and 15 and 14-year-old girls to be mothers one day. They're conditioning them not to get pregnant until they're 18 so that they won't have to be financially responsible for their children, right? That's what society is doing. And then we're sending 18-year-olds into a world unprepared to deal with the dynamic of being part of a functional system, and that dysfunction just generates more dysfunction. We throw dysfunctional people into a dysfunctional system, and it produces more dysfunction. And every time there's one functional person, like Paul Emerson, surrounded by a bunch of dysfunctional people, that functional person is told that they are the problem. How dare you show up with the answers to the questions? Don't you understand that we don't have the answers to the questions? And pretending like your answer is better than my answer? You think that I've been doing this for 5 years and I don't know what I'm doing? That you can just show up today and know how to do all of the stuff that needs to be done? You don't. Who are you? I've been doing this wrong for the last 5 years. Who do you think you are to be able to show up and do it right when I can't even do it right? What you need to do is conform and fall in line and be just as broken as I am, so that we can try our best to be able to endure and survive this dysfunction together, right? That's the world that we live in. That's the reason why the United States can blatantly tell the average Americans in general, that they're going to go to Iraq to fight a war with the Iraqi people because we have to, and not a single person in America is willing to not go to work for one day to show the government that we are not in compliance and we're not okay with it. There's no way to unify the entire country to move as a single unit because we think in terms of black and white. We think in terms of this person is the enemy, when the enemy is Europeans, Caucasians, all the elitists that have all the money at the very top, that is making sure that they use their money and their finances to keep division between the average individuals, so that people like Paul Emerson can't have stable, healthy relationships and become part of a society. So that what? So that Caucasians and Europeans can have more people on the planet than other non-Caucasians and non-Europeans. What is the function of that? What is the goal of that? How does that make the planet better? Like, why is that even energy that you should be invested in? Why is it, if Europeans are so superior, why is it necessary to engage in unethical, immoral, and illegal tactics to sustain and maintain superiority? Superiority is a force of nature. Tornadoes don't pass paperwork and get permits. The sun doesn't ask for permission to rise and fall. The tide comes and goes as it chooses. There's no, the homeowners association can't stop a mudslide. Natural order does what natural order wants to do because it is all powerful, present everywhere, right? So these are the the things that need to be said and structured in a way that for some reason nobody wants to take the time out to do it. And I don't understand why. And it would have been awesome if I could have sat at a computer and listened to what I'm saying now 20 years ago, because it would have made more sense. It would have been like, my father said this to me. And if my father said this to me, and you're some random person on the internet that doesn't know my father, and you're communicating to me the same thing my father is saying to me, then empirically this must be correct, because this is a peer review. This person had a certain experience, and you had a very similar experience, even though y'all are two different people and y'all don't know each other. So that must mean that it is valid and true. But we don't do that because we believe that what I think is happening is that I think that the average person believes that through the story of Jesus Christ as a child, that you are Jesus Christ and that you are God incarnate, and that you will one day discover and find out that you are the savior of the planet, and you're gonna have to elevate and rise up and challenge the system and do all of the things that is expected of you as the second coming of Christ. And I honestly believe that the Christian ego, every last Christian believes that they are actually Jesus Christ. All 100% of them, on some fundamental level, believes that they are the embodiment and the reincarnation of Christ, and they're waiting for God to come down and select you individually so that you can fulfill your divine role and your divine God judgment over the planet. And you carry that around as a child until you become an adult. And then once you become an adult, it becomes internalized in a subconscious thought. And then you move through the world with your relationship to Jesus. Because you are fucking Jesus. Everything you do is correct because you did it. Your ego is like, if I make a decision, it was the right decision because I made a decision. If I do something, it was right because I did it. Like, that's, to me, that's what it feels like. Dude, you're all over the place. Go to VA, get some meds straight. No, I'm literally not all over the place. There is no structured way to have this conversation, because that's the point. If you think about it, the reason why we can't address the issues in the world is because there's no standardized way to do it. There's no standardized way to do it. For years, we kept saying we shouldn't be murdering African Americans in the street because it's a bad idea and humans have rights and we shouldn't do these things and we shouldn't engage in these behaviors. And people justified it because it wasn't them. They justified it because it wasn't them. They spent years and years and years fighting and protesting against it. Then they created the Black Lives Matter movement. And then what was the pushback? All lives matter. All lives matter. Right? And then what happened? Caucasian women and Caucasian men are now being murdered in the street. But Caucasian men and Caucasian women spent 20-something years justifying the murdering of non-Caucasian men and women. So now they can't even get the same fucking justice because they flooded the justice system with rational arguments and justifications. So the legal system has been given enough justification for justification of murdering citizens of the United States. Because even though you don't want to accept that an African American is a citizen, we are in fact citizens. And when we were murdered and beaten and discriminated against and disrespected, you told us to take our meds, quit doing drugs, and quit being violent, right? And so now you see the flip side of that energy, and now there's a condition to where the issue can't be addressed because you've already said all of the things that allows the government to justify the oppression of Caucasian men and Caucasian women, right? So you're saying I'm all over the place, but the reality is that the axioms have to be formed. The axioms have to be formed. The standardization of the understanding has to be there so that the ordered mind can formulate correct thinking processes to align itself with a desired understanding the desired outcome. 1 plus 1 equals 2 because 1 and 1 is a value. X plus Y equals Z are undefined values. You have to define them to determine if they're qualified or not. If X is 1 and Y is 2, then Z can't be anything other than 3, right? But you have to be able to formulate and articulate the algebraic expression to understand the problem. The problem has to be solved. But to solve the problem, you have to be able to structure the question, right? Yeah, let's talk about the legal system. A brother can go out there and commit a crime, get out of jail between 100 and 500,000. Blind white dude goes out and does the same crime automatically. His shit costs 5K. I did 27 years in the 82nd, and all I hear you doing is crying about every single thing, and then you put a twist on it and use racism as an excuse. I'm not making excuses. I'm talking about my experience. I'm not saying that everything is racism. Everything is bullying, right? I think we can agree that bullying is a thing. I think that we can agree that you don't have to have a justification to be a bully, but I also think that a bully can be a bully because of your ethnicity, right? They can all be true at the same time. What I want people to try to understand is that if a person is disrespecting you and you defend yourself from disrespect, and the social dynamic of the community environment that you're in pushes against that, the question you should be asking is why? Why is it okay for me to be disrespected, but it's not okay for me to defend the disrespect? Why don't I have enough agency as a human being to defend myself from being disrespected? Why should I have to accept the disrespect? Whether it's race, sex, gender, whatever the justification. If you feel like someone is disrespecting you and you respectfully, formally, informally, like if you feel disrespected and you question that disrespect, and then you are questioned for checking somebody that's disrespecting you, to me, that is inequality. However you frame it. If you don't like me because of my skin complexion, you don't have to like me because of my skin complexion. If you disrespect me for any reason, to include and not limited to my skin complexion, as an American citizen, I should have the right to say, the way you approach me is not fair, and I would prefer that you not approach me in that manner. And then if a third person shows up to get me to understand how I don't have the right or the authority to communicate how I feel to someone that has directly done something to me, you have to ask yourself why that is a thing. Dude, talk to people that are being disrespected to you, real simple. But you're missing what I'm saying. You're missing the point of what I'm saying. If you're in a group, if you're in a social group, and if you're in a social dynamic, and you have someone that is challenging you, and you try to respectfully communicate to them that you don't want to be challenged, and other people around them and you are trying to get you to understand your place in the pecking order of the hierarchy, that is the foundational issue and that needs to be addressed. Whether it's racism, whether it's because you're a woman, whether it's because you're a man, right? Whatever the reasoning, it doesn't make any sense for that type of behavior to exist above the high school level. That's the clarification I'm trying to make. I'm calling it racism, but that's the way you structure the understanding to be able to address the issue. You think that the things that are going on in the world are normal because we associate human structure society with natural order, but it's not. That's not the way it's supposed to work. So don't talk to people that are being disrespectful to you. Real simple. Yeah, too much crying. Deuces. I'm not crying. And it's easy to say don't talk to people that are disrespecting you, but how do you function in a world if everybody is disrespecting you? If everywhere you go, you're being subjected to disrespect, how do you function as an adult in that type of environment? These are the these are the types of things that are not being addressed in the world. Like this is the point of why I'm taking the time out to even to communicate any of this stuff, right? Like that's the point. That's why I structured the beginning of the video with the dynamic between the African American man and the African American woman. Because at the end of the day, if you're in a relationship with the woman that's disrespecting you, and you call your mom, or you call your brother, or you call your uncle, or you call your friend, or you call her friend, and they keep telling you that as a man, it's your fault because you need to be man enough to be able to handle her unreasonable demands and expectations, and you need to be willing to self sabotage to meet her unreasonable demands and unreasonable expectations. And then you do all of those things, and then you find yourself broken, poor, and alone, but you are in compliance with what society said you're supposed to do. How do you recover from that? How do you recover from it? And that applies to women too. There are a lot of females that do get in relationships with a lot of shitty people. Shitty people are shitty people. Good people trying to interact with shitty people is kind of like what I'm trying to address. But the standardization of this idea of this quote unquote black person versus quote unquote white person is the problem that society is currently having, which is the point of these videos. No more questions. Okay. So yeah. So that's pretty much. So that I don't deviate too far, I'm gonna read the Politics of Aristotle. I'm gonna read the first chapter, maybe not the whole thing, and I want you to pay very close attention to the way that book one is structured and what book one is outlining when it comes to 2026 social dynamics and everything that I said at the beginning of this video. It's a lot of pages. I don't know if I'll read all of them, but I'll start with book one. This is what it looks like. This is the structure. And I don't do this all the time, so this is going to be fairly dry. I'm just going to read it. This is Aristotle's Politics, book one. 1252. Every state is a community of some kind, and every community is established with a view of some good. For mankind always acts in order to obtain that which they think good. But if all the communities aim at some good, the state or political community, which is the highest of all and which embraces all the rest, aims at good in the greatest degree than any other, and at the highest goal, and at the highest good. Some people think 1252 1. Some people think that the qualifications of a statesman, king, householder, and master are the same, and that they differ not in kind, but only in the number of their subjects. For example, the ruler over a few is called a master. More, the manager of a household. Over still larger member, a statesman or king. And if there were no difference between a great household and a small, as if there were no difference between a great household and a small state. The distinction which is made between the king and the statesman is as follows. When the government is personal, the rule is a king. When according to the rule of political science, the citizen rule and are ruled in turn, then he is called a statesman. But all this is a mistake. For government differs in kind, as will be evident to anyone who considers the matter according to the method which has hitherto guided us, as in other departments of science, So is so in politics, the compound should always be resolved into the simple elements, or at least part of the whole. We must therefore look at the elements of which the state is composed in order that we may see in what the different kind of rule differs from one another, and whether any scientific result can be attained by each one of them. 1252.2. He who thus considers things in their first growth and origin, whether a state or anything else, will obtain the clearest view of them in the first place. There must be a union of those who cannot exist without each other, namely a male and female, that the race may continue. And this is a union which is formed not of deliberate purpose, but because in common with other animals and with plants, mankind has a natural desire to leave behind them an image of themselves and of nature and of natural rule and subject. They both may be preserved. For that which can force for that which can forces be the exercise of mind is by nature intended to be lord and master, and that which can with its body give an effect to such foresight is a subject, and by nature a slave. Hence master and slave have the same interest. Now nature has distinguished between the male Now nature has distinguished between the female and the slave, for she is not niggardly like the smith who fashions the dolphin knife for many uses. She makes each thing for a single use, and every instrument is best made when intended for one and not for many uses. but among barbarians, no distinction is made between woman and slave, because there is no natural rule among them. There are a community of slaves, male and female. Wherefore the poets say, it is meet that Hellenists should rule over barbarians, as if they thought the barbarians and the slaves were by nature one. One of these two relationships between man and woman, master and slave, the first thing to arise is the family. And Hideous is right when he says, first house and wife, and then ox for the plow. For the ox is the poor man's slave. The family is the associate establishment by nature for the supply of men everyday wants, and then members of it are called by Chrondas, I don't know, Charondas, companions of the clipboard, and by Emetheus the Cretan, companions of the manager. But when several families are united and the association aims to something more than the supply of those daily needs, the first society to be formed is the village, and the most natural form of the village appears to be that of a colony formed from the family, composed of the children and the grandchildren, who are said to be suckled with the same milk. And this is the reason why Hellenist states were originally governed by kings, because the Hellenists were under royal rule before they came together, as the barbarians still are. Every family is ruled by the eldest, and therefore, in the colonies of the family, the king forms of government prevail because they were of the same blood. As Homer says, each one gives law to his children and to his wives, for they lived desperately, as was the manner which was the manner in ancient times. Wherefore men say that the gods have a king, because they themselves either are or were in ancient times under the rule of a king. For they imagine not only the forms of the gods, but their way of life to be like their own. When several villagers are united in a single complete community, large enough to be merely large enough to nearly or quite self-sufficient, the state comes into existence, ori- originating in the bare needs of life and continuing in existence for the sake of a good life. And therefore, if the earliest form of society are natural, so is the state, for it is the end of them, and the nature of a thing it is in. For what each thing is, when fully developed, we call its nature, whether we are speaking of a man, a horse, or a family. Besides, the final cause and end of a thing is the best, and to be self-sufficient is the end, and to be self-sufficient in the end and the best. Hence, it is evident that the state is a creation of nature, and the man is by nature a political animal, and he who by nature and not by mere accident is without a state is either a bad man or above humanity. He is like the troubleless, lawless, hitherless one, whom Homer denounces. The natural outcast is for with a lore of the war. he may be he may be compared to an isolated piece of dry dryad. Now that the man is more of a political animal than bees or any other gargantuous animal is evident. Nature, as we often say, makes nothing in vain. Water. Next time I do this reading my next time I do this reading wearing my actual glasses. Now that man is more of a political animal than bees or any other gar- gargantuous animal is evident. Nature, as we often say, makes nothing in vain, and man is the only animal whom she has endowed with the gift of speech. And whereas mere voices is but an indication of pleasure and pain, and is therefore found in other animals, for their nature attains to the perception of pleasure and pain, and the imitation of them to one another, and no further. The power of speech is intended to set forth the expedience and inexpedience, and therefore likewise the just and the unjust. And it is a characteristic of man that he alone has any sense of good and evil, or just and unjust, and the and the like, and the association of living beings who have this sense make a family and a state. Further, the state is by nature clearly prior to the family and to the individual, since the whole is of necessity prior to the part. For example, if the whole body be destroyed, there will be no foot or hand, except in the equivoc, except in the equivalent sense, as we might speak of a stone hand. For when destroyed, the hand will be no better than that. But things are defined by their working and power, and we ought not to say that they are the same and we ought not say they are the same when they no longer have their properties equally, but only that they have the same name. The proof that the state is a creation of nature and prior to the individual is that the individual, when isolated, is not self-sufficient, and therefore he is like a part in relation to the whole. But he who is unable to live in society, or who has no need because he is sufficient for himself, must be either a beast or a god. He is no part of the state. A social instinct is implanted in all men by nature, and yet he who first founded the state was the greatest of benefactors. For man, when perfected in the best of animals, but when separated from law and justice, he is the worst of all. Since armed injustice is the more dangerous, and he is equipped at birth with arms meant to be used by intelligence and virtue, which he may use for the worst end. Wherefore, if he has not virtue, he is the most unholy and the most savage of animals, and the most full of lust and gluttony. But justice is the bond of man and state. For the administration of justice, which is the determination of what is just, is the principle of order in political society. Seeing then that the state is made up of households, before speaking of a state, we must speak of the management of the household. The part of household management corresponds to the person who composes the household, and a complete household consists of slave and freeman. Now we should begin by examining everything in its fewest possible elements. And the first and fewest people part of a family are master and slave, husband and wife, father and children. We have therefore to consider that each of these three relationships is and ought to be, the relationship of master and servant, the marriage relation, a conjunction of man and wife, has no name of its own, and thirdly, the procreation relationship. This also has no proper name. And there is another element of a household, the so-called art of getting wealth, which according to some is identical with household management. According to others, a principal part of it, the nature of this art, will also have to be considered by us. Let us first speak of master and slave, looking to the needs of a practical life, and also seeking to attain some better theory of their relation than exists at present. For some are of opinion that the rule of a master is a science, and that the management of a household and the mastership of slave and the political policies and royal rule, as I was saying at the outset, all are the same. Others affirm that the rule of a master over slave is contrary to nature, and that the distinction between slave and freeman exists by law only, not by nature, and being in interference with nature is therefore unjust. Property is part of the household, and the art of acquiring property is part of the art of managing the household. For no man can live well, or indeed live at all, unless he be provided with necessities. And as in the art which have a definite sphere, the worker must have their own property, instruments from the accomplishment of their work. So it is the management of a household. Now instruments are of various sorts. Some are living, others lifeless. In the rudder, the pilot of a ship has a lifeless, in the looking man, a living instrument. For in the art, the servant is a kind of instrument. Thus, too, a possession is an instrument for maintaining life. And so, in the arrangement of the family, a slave is a living possession, and property a number of such instruments, and the servant is himself an instrument, which takes precedent of all other instruments. For if every instrument could accomplish its own work, obeying or anticipating the will of others, like the statue of Daedalus or the tripod of Prometheus, which says the poet, of their own accord enters the assembly of the gods. If in like manner the shuttle would weave, and the platform touch the lyrics without a hand to guide them, chief workmen would not want servants, nor master's slave. Here, however, another distinction must be drawn. The instrument commonly so called are instruments of production, while a possession is an instrument of action. Shutter, for example, is not only of use, but something else is made by it. Whereas of a garment of a bead there is only the one. Whereas a garment of the bead there is only the use. Further, As production, the actions are different in kind, and both require instruments. The instrument which they employ must likewise differ in kind, but life is action and not production. And therefore, the slave is the minister of action. Again, a possession is spoken of as a part is spoken of. For the part is not only a part of something else, but wholly belongs to it. And this is also true of a possession. The master is only the master of the slave. He does not belong to him, whereas the slave is not only the slave of his master, but wholly belongs to him. Hence, we see what is the nature and office of a slave. He who is by nature not his own, but another's man, is by nature a slave, and he may be said to be another's man, who, being a human being, is also a possession, and a possession may be defined as an instrument of action, separable from its possessor. 25:4-5. But is there anyone thus intended by nature to be a slave, and for whom such a condition is expedient and right, or rather is not all slavery a violation of nature? 25:4-5. There is no difficulty in answering this question on grounds both of reason and of fact, for that some should rule and others be ruled is a thing not necessarily but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked for subjugation, others for rule. For 12:45:5. And there are many kinds both of rule and subject, and that rule is the better which is exercised over better subjects. For example, to rule over man is better than to rule over wild beasts, for the work is better which is executed by better workmen. And where one man rules and another is ruled, they may be said to have a work. For in all things which form a composite whole, and which are made up of parts, whether continuous or discrete, a distinction between the ruler and the subject element comes to light. Such a duality exists in living creatures, but not in them only. It originates in the constitution of the universe. Even in things which have no life, there is a ruling principle, as in the musical mode, but we are wandering from the subject. We will therefore restrict ourselves to the living creature, which is in the first place consistent of soul and body, and these are two. The one is by nature the ruler, the other the subject. But then we must look for the intention of nature in things which retain their nature, and not in things which are corrupted. And therefore we must study the man who is in the most perfect state, both of body and soul. For in him we shall see the true relation of the two, although in bad and corrupted nature the body will often appear to rule over the soul, because they are in an evil and unnatural condition. At all events, we may firstly observe in living creatures both this despotical, despotical, and a constitutional rule. For the soul rules the body with a despotical rule, whereas the intellectual rule the apparatus with a constitution and a royal rule. And it is clear that the rule of the soul over the body and of the mind and of the rational element over the passion is natural and expedient, whereas the equality of the two of the rule of the inferior is always hurtful. The same holds good of animals in relation to men, for tamed animals have a better nature than wild, and all tamed animals are better off when they are ruled by man, for then they are preserved. Again, The male is by nature superior and the female inferior, and the one rules and the other is ruled. The principle is necessarily extended to all of mankind, whereas then there is such a difference as that between soul and body, or between man and animal, as in the case of those whose business is to use their body and who can do nothing better. The lower sort are by nature slaves, and is better for them, as for all inferiors, that they should be under the rule of a master. For he who can be, for he who can be, and therefore is another, and he who participates in rational principle enough to apprehend but not to have such a principle is a slave by nature, whereas the lower animal cannot even apprehend a principle. They obey their instincts and intend, and indeed the use made of slaves and of tame animals is not very different, for both with their bodies minute, ministers to the needs of life. Nature would like to distinguish between the bodies of free men and the slave, making the one strong for servitude labor, the other upright, and although useless for such service, useful for political life and the arts, both of war and peace. But the opposite often happens, that some have the souls and others have the bodies of free men, and doubtless of men differ from one another in the mere forms of their bodies, as much as the statue of the gods do form them. And doubtless, if men differ from one another in the mere forms of their bodies, as much as the statues of gods do from men, all will acknowledge that the inferior class should be slaves of the superior. And if this is true of the body, how much more just that a similar distinction should exist in the soul. But the beauty of the body is seen, whereas the beauty of the soul is not seen. It is clear then that some men are by nature free and others slave, and that for these latter slaves is both expedient and right, but that those who take the opposite view have it a certain way right on their side may be easily seen. For the word slave and slaves, for the words slavery and slave are used in two senses. There is a slave or slavery by law as well as by nature. The law of which I speak is not a sort of convection. It's not a sort of convention. The law by which whenever is taken in war is supported to belong to the victor. But this right may jurists, jurists impeach as they would, or operants who brought forward an unconstitutional measure. They detest the notion that because one man has the power of doing violence and is superior in brute strength, another should be his slave and subject. Even among philosophers, there is a difference of opinion. The origin of the dispute and what makes the view invalid each other territory is in, is as follows in some sense: virtue, when finished with means, has actually the greatest power of exercise force, and as superior power is only found where there is superior excellence of some kind. Power seems to imply virtue, and despite to be and and the dispute to be simply one about justice, for it is due to one party identifying justice with goodwill, while the other identifies it with mere rule of the stronger. If these views are thus set out separately, the other views have no force or plausibility against the view that the subject in virtue ought to rule or be master, others clinging as they think supplies to a principle of justice. For law and custom are a sort of justice. Assume that slavery is in accordance with the custom of war, is justified by law. But at the same moment, they deny this. For what is for what if the cause of the war be unjust? And again, no one would ever say that he is a slave who is unworthy to be a slave. Were this the case, men of the highest rank would be slaves, and the children of slaves, if they or their parents had to have been taken captive and sold. Wherefore Hellenes do not like to call Hellenes slaves, but confine the term to barbarians. Yet in using this language, they really mean the natural slave of whom we spoke at first, for it must be admitted that some are slaves everywhere, others nowhere. The same principle applies to nobility. Hellenes regards themselves as noble wherever and not only in their own country, but they deem the barbarian noble only when at home, thereby implying that there are two sorts of nobility and freedom. And there are two sorts of nobility and freedom, the one absolute, the other relative. The Hellenes of Tridicia says, whom would presume to call me servant, who am I both sides sprung from the stem of the gods? What does this mean but that they distinguish freedom and slavery, noble and humble birth, by the two principles of good and evil? They think that as men and animals beget men and animals, so from good man a good man springs. But this is what nature, though she may intend it, cannot always accomplish. We see then that there is some foundation for the difference of opinion, and that all are not either slaves by nature or freemen by nature, and also that there is in some case a marked distinction between the two classes, rendering it expedient and right for the ones to be slaves and the others to be master, the one practicing obedience, the other exercising the authority and leadership which nature intended them to have. The abuse of the authority is injurious to both, for the interests of part and whole, of body and soul, are the same, and the slave is a part of the master, a living but separate part of his bodily frame. Hence, where the relation of master and slave between them is natural, they are friends and have a common interest. But where it rests merely on law and force, the reverse is true. The previous remarks are quiet enough to show that the rule of a master is not a constitutional rule, and that all of the different kinds of rule are not, as some affirm, the same with each other. For there is one rule of exercise over subject who are by nature free, others over subject who are by nature slaves. The rule of a household is a monarch, for every household is under the head, whereas constitutional rule is a government of free men and equal. The master is not called a master because he is science, for he has science, but because he is of a certain character. And the same remark applies to the slave and the free man. Still, there may be a science for the master and a science for the slave. The service of the slave would be such that the man of sorceress, of Ciceres, taught who made money by instructing slaves in their ordinary duties, and such a knowledge may be carried further, so as to include cookery and similar menial arts. For some duties are of more necessity, others of more honorable sort. As the proverb says, slave before slave, master before master. But all such branches of knowledge are servile, servile. There is likewise the science of the master, which teaches the use of slaves. For the master, as such, is concerned not with the acquisition, but with the use of them. Yet this so-called science is not anything great or wonderful, for the master need only know how to order that which the slave must know how to execute. Hence, those who are in a position which places them above toil have stewards who attend to their household while they occupy themselves with philosophy or with politics. But the art of acquiring slaves, I mean the justly acquiring them, differs both from the art of the master and the art of the slave, bearing a species of hunting or war. Enough, enough of the distinction between master and slave. Let us now inquire into property generally, in the art of getting wealth in accordance with our usual method. For a slave has been shown to be a part of property. The first question is whether the art of getting wealth is the same with the art of managing a household or a part of it or instruments to it, and if the last, whether is the way that the art of making shuttles is instrumental to the art of weaving, or in the way that the casting of bronze is instrumental in the art of statuing. For there are not instrumental in the same way, but the one provides tools and the other material. And by material, I mean the substratum out of which any work is made. Thus, wool is the material of the weaver, bronze of the statuer. Now it is easy to see that the art of household management is not identical with the art of getting wealth. For the one uses the material which the other provides. For the art which uses household stores can be no other than the art of household management. There is, however, a doubt whether the art of getting wealth is a part of household management or a distinct art. If the getter of wealth has to consider whence wealth and property can be produced, but there are many sources of property and riches, then the husbandry and the care and provisions of food in general part of the wealth getting art or distinction art. Again, there are many sorts of food, and therefore there are many kinds of lives, both of animals and men. They must all have food, and the differences in their food have made differences in their ways of life. For the beasts, some are gargantuous, others are solitary, gracious, some are gracious, others are solitary. They live in a way which in best adapts to sustain them accordingly, as they are carnivores or herbivores, or for they are carnivores or herbivores or omnivores, and their habits are determined by them by nature in such a manner that they may obtain with greater facility the food of their choices. But in differing but in differentiating species have different tastes. The same things are not naturally pleasant to all of them, and therefore the lives of carnivores or herbivore animals further differ among themselves. In the lives of men, too, there is a great difference. The laziest are shepherds, who lead an idle life and get their substance without trouble from tame animals, their flocks having to wander from place to place in search of pastures. They are compelled to follow them, cultivate a sort of living farm. Others support themselves by hunting, which is a different kind. Some, for example, are Brigandiers, Brigands, others the dwellers near lakes or marshes or rivers or a sea in which there are fish, are fishermen, and others live by the pursuit of birds and wild beasts. The greatest number attain a living from the cultivated fruits of the soil. Such are the modes of substance which prevail among those whose industry springs up, whose industry spring up of itself, and whose food is not acquired by exchange and retail trade. There is the shepherd, the husbandman, and the briggle, the fisherman, the hunter. Some gain a comfortable maintenance out of two employments, eking out the deficiencies of one of them by another. Thus, the life of a shepherd may be combined with that of a brigadier, the life of a farmer with that of a hunter. Other modes of life are similar, combined in ways which the needs of men may require. Property in a sense of the bare livelihood seems to be given by nature herself to all. But when they are first born and when they are grown up, for some animals bringing forth together with their offspring so much food as will last until they are able to supply themselves of this, the veniroperous or omnivore or overworth animals are an instinctual, and the veniroperous animals have up to a certain time to supply a certain time a supply of food for their young and themselves, which is called milk. In like manner, we may infer that after the birth of animals, plants exist for their sake, and that the other animals exist for their sake of man. The tame for use in food. The wild is not all, at least the greatest part of them, for food and for the provisions of clothing and various instruments. Now, if nature makes nothing incomplete and nothing in vain, the inference must be that she has made all animals for the sake of man. And so, in part of view, the art of war is a natural art of acquisition, for the art of acquisition includes hunting, an art which we ought to practice against wild beasts and against men who through intention by nature to be governed will not submit, for war of such a kind is naturally just. 1256b8. Of the art of acquisition, then, there is one kind which by nature is part of the management of a household, insofar as the art of household management must either find ready to hand or itself provide such things necessary to life and useful for community of the family or state as can be stored. There are the elements of true riches, for the amount of property which is needed for a good life is not unlimited, although Solomon is one of his poems say that no boundary rich has been fixed for man, but there is a boundary fixed, just as there is the other art, for the instruments of any art are never unlimited, either in number or size, and riches may be defined as a number of instruments to be used in a household or in a state. And so we see that there is a natural art of acquisition, which is practiced by managers of households and by statements. And what is the reason of this? 1256b9. There is another variation of the art of acquisition, which is commonly rightly called an art of wealth getting, and has in fact suggested the notion that riches and property have no limit, being nearly contested with the preceding, is often identified with it, but though they are not very different, neither are they the same. The kindly already described is governed by nature. The other is gained by experience and art. Let us begin by discussing of the question with the following consideration. 1257a9. Of everything which we possess, there are two uses. Both belong to the thing as such, but not in the same manner. For one is the proper, and the other the improper or second use of it. For example, a shoe is used for wear and is used for exchange. Both are use of both are uses of the shoe. He who gives a shoe in exchange for money or food to him who wants one does indeed use the shoe as a shoe, but this is not its proper or primary purpose. For a shoe is not made to be an object of barter. The same may be said of all possessions, for the art of exchange extends to all of them, and it arises at first from what is natural, from the circumstance that some have too little, others have too much. Hence, we may infer that retail trade is not a natural part of the art of getting wealth. Had it been so, men would have ceased to exchange when they had enough. In the first community, indeed, which is in family, this art is obvious of no use, but it begins to be useful when the society increases. For the member of the family originally had all things in common. Later, when the family divides into parts, the parts share in many things in different things which they had to give in exchange for what they wanted. A kind of barter which is still practiced among barbarous nations who exchange with one another the necessities of life and nothing more, giving and receiving wine, for example, in exchange for corn and the like. This sort of barter is not part of the wealth getting art, and is not contrary to nature, but is needed for the satisfaction of men's natural wants. The other or more complex form of exchange grew as might have been inferred as might have been inferred out of the simpler when inhabited of one country becomes more dependent on those of another, and they import what they need and export what they have too much of. Money, money necessarily came into use, for the various necessities of life are not easily carried about, and hence men agreed to employ in their dealing with each other something which was intrinsically useful and easily applicable to the purpose of life. For example, iron, silver, and the like. Of this, the value was at first measured simply by size and weight, but in process of time, they put a stamp upon it to save the trouble of weighing in the mark the value. 1257b9. When the use of coin had once been discovered out of the barter of necessity, articles arose the other art of wealth getting, namely retail trade, was the first prob- which was the first probably a simple matter, but became more complicated as soon as men learned to experience whether whence and by what exchange the greatest profit might be made. Originating in the use of coin, the art of getting wealth is generally thought to be chiefly concerned with it, and to be the art which produces riches and wealth, having to consider how they may be accumulated. Indeed, riches is assumed by many to only be. Indeed, riches is assumed by many to be only a quantity of coin, because the art of getting wealth and retail trade are concerned with coin. Other maintenance that coin money is merely shame, a thing not natural, but conventional only because if the user substituted another commodity for it, it is worthless, and because it is not useful as a means to any of the necessities of life, and indeed, he who is rich in coin may often be wanting of necessity food. But how can that be wealth, of which a man may have a greater abundance and yet perish with hunger, like like Midas in the fable, whose insatiable, insanable prayers turned everything that was set before him into gold. 1257b9. Hence, men seek men seek after a better notion of riches and of the art of getting wealth than the mere acquisition of coin, and that are right. For natural riches and the natural arts of wealth getting are a different thing. In their true form, they are part of the management of a household, whereas retail trade is the art of producing wealth, not in every way, but the exchange. And it is thought to be concerned with coin, for coin is the unit of exchange and the measure of limit of it, and there is no bound to be riches which spring from this art of wealth getting. As in the art of medicine, there is no limit to the pursuit of health, but as in the other arts, there is no limit to the pursuit of their several several ends, for they aim to accomplish their ends to the utmost. But of the means there is a limit, for the ends is always the limit. So too is this art of wealth getting. There is no limit of the ends, which is riches of the superfluous kind and the acquisition of wealth. But the art of wealth getting, which constitutes in household management, on the other hand, has a limit. The unlimited acquisition of wealth is not. The unlimited acquisition of wealth is not its business, and therefore, in one point of view, all riches must have a limit. Nevertheless, as a matter of fact, we find the opposite to be the case. For all getters of wealth increase their hoard of coin without limit. The source of the confusion is the near connexus between the two kinds of wealth getting, and either the instrument is the same, although the use is different, and so they pass into one another. For each is a use of the same property, but with a different accumulation is the end in which one case, but there is a further end in the other. Hence, some persons are led to believe that getting wealth is the object of household management, and the whole idea of their lives is that they ought either to increase their money without limit or at the rate not to lose it. The origins of this disposition in man is there are intents there are intents upon living only and not upon living well, and that their desires are unlimited. They also desire that the means of gratifying them should be without limit. Those who do aim at a good life seek the means of obtaining bodily pleasure, and since the enjoyment of these appear to depend on property, they are absorbed into getting wealth, and so there arise the second species of wealth getters. For as their employment is in excess, they seek an art which produces the excess of enjoyment, and if they are not able to supply their pleasure by the art of getting wealth, they try other arts, using in turn every faculty in a manner contrary to nature. The quality of courage, for example, is not intended to make wealth, but to inspire confidence. Neither is this the aim of the general or of the physical art, but the one aim at victory and the other at health. Nevertheless, some men turn every quality of art into a means of getting wealth. This they conceive to be the end, and to the promotion of the end they think all things must contribute. Thus then we have considered the art of wealth getting, which is unnecessary, and why men want it, and also the necessary art of wealth getting, which we have seen to be different from the others, and to be naturally part of the art of managing a household concerned with the provision of food, not, however, like the former kind, unlimited, but having a limit. 12:58, 8:10. There's so many pages. I think I'm gonna stop here. I was gonna try to read all the way through to the end, but I've got 8 more pages, and I've already probably been reading for almost an hour. So I'm gonna stop on page 15, and I'll definitely do a part 2 video where I'll continue where I left off. But as always, my name is Paul Emerson, and I've given you my 2 cents.